a lot of times we weren't able to do that. I mean, today, as you and I are talking here, there's 1,572 Americans that are still listed as missing in action from the Vietnam War in
Wow.
Southeast Asia. So
Wow.
out of that, there are 98 Green Berets that are still listed as missing in action. So this is the 40 are from traditional missions in Vietnam, like the A camps, like when Lang Vei got overrun in February 1968. The NVA almost overran the entire camp, and during that battle, during the night, a couple of men got separated, and to this day, there's at least one still listed as missing in action. From the Secret War, we have 58 Green Berets that are still MIA, including the two I just talked to you about that were from Idaho,
Wow.
Glenn Lane and Robert Owen. And so out of the 58 Green Berets, those two gentlemen are part of that. And that's been one of our nagging gut issues for us is to have these men we weren't able to get back. But if somebody's dead, like in my case, we always told the team, if I'm killed, you don't worry about my body. You worry about getting the team out alive because that's what the priority is to
Sure.
live and come back and fight another day to continue the missions.
Powerful. Very powerful. All right. So how did you get, what was your ingress like? Would you go in a helicopter and then you were rappelled down in the center of a certain location or you would, I don't know, give me an
No, you're right.
idea.
The helicopters were our primary method of operation for insertion. So I'd just say 90, maybe as much as 92, 93% of the insertions. Sometimes on bright light, there would be a crash site, be no LZ. They would have metal ladders that we would climb down, or we have ropes and we would rappel in. Because one of the tactics that we refined in SOG during the Secret War was if you have an LZ that's too small, you can't get the helicopter in. How do you get the men out? Well, they developed the process of bringing them out on ropes. So initially they have 100-foot ropes, then they came to 150-foot rope. So a helicopter would come over, find a hole in the jungle. You had to get the helicopter there. They would drop the ropes down with sandbags on them in a D ring. And then the team on the ground would be wearing a Swiss seat. That's a rope seat around your waist with a D ring. And you would hook into the D ring on the end of the rope. And then on your harness, you had a D ring here to hook into it to keep you stable. In case you got shot, you would remain on that rig. And then the helicopter would lift up. Well, sometimes while the helicopter was lifting up, they would hear the enemy firing at the helicopter or at us, and they would begin to leave the area, and we're still in the jungle. And we'd be like a human pinball, ricocheting off the trees and things before they came out of the clearance. But that was
Crazy.
one of the processes we refined
Oh
over
man.
time to get a more stable, and eventually had what they called a stable rig, where you had a harness and everything. You wore it, so when it came time for the helicopter, they dropped the rope, you hooked in, and you're out. If you got shot, that harness would keep you stable.
Wow. Crazy. All right. So give me an idea, one of the most difficult missions that you were a part of. Something that you felt like maybe you weren't able to accomplish it or give me something tough.
Sure. Well, we had after we reformed the team, we trained it up, and by August of 1968, we did a mission in the Ashaw Valley, which was inserting Air Force sensors along a trail. So the sensors were inserted, so anything came down that trail. It was a good sized trail. We could handle trucks, could handle tanks, personnel, and then the Air Force would come by and then take the intelligence gathered off the computers that were inserted. So we did two of those. We had a practice mission, a couple of night ambushes and things like that. And then in October, we had a mission to go in, try to get to an American POW camp. We had a primary mission, which was area reconnaissance, but in the briefing, they told us there was a POW camp where Americans were. We wanted to try to get to that camp if we could. On the second day, um, after moving all day through the jungle, we made heavy enemy contact, and we were forced. We had a six-man team. Don Wolken was the team leader, and then I was the radio operator, and we had three South Vietnamese that were with us. and we got atop a little knoll, set up our perimeter, and they came at us for over 2 hours before we made any contact with TAC Air. We finally got TAC Air. I directed napalm runs, gun runs, bombing runs, and CBU, cluster bomb units.
Wow.
And so by almost dark, a South Vietnamese helicopter came in and hovered over some elephant grass. Elephant grass could be anywhere from 8 to 12, 13 feet tall. He couldn't land, but he hovered for 10 minutes while we got to that team, I mean, to the helicopter. And we were involved in that firefight. When we got on the helicopter, I was down to my last magazine and my last hand grenade. And after he pulled us out, he came back and told us later that helicopter had 48 bullet holes in it. And so that was for me the first major effort. And 2 days before that, we had a 9-man recon team that came up against 10,000 NVA during the day. And the NVA kept trying to overrun them. And they killed so many, they stacked up the bodies. And the reason why we know that is that one of the surviving Americans, Lynn Black Jr., had a phone call 25 years later from a general who ambushed him that day. And he told him, says, you inflicted 90% casualties on our 10,000 man division. And Lynn's team lost 3 men, but they were able to get out alive. So those are kind of extreme odds that our teams came up against. So for me, that was October 7th, 1968, day I'll never forget. And Captain Tin was the helicopter pilot that saved our team that day.
Amazing. Inspirational, without a doubt. So let's talk about your units and the men that were part of these units. What do you think separated them from the more common average man? I mean,
Well,
these guys had to have tremendous hearts, tremendous focus and drive and discipline.
yeah, a lot of them, like myself, I flunked out, but there are other guys like John Walton from Bentonville, Arkansas. John had been in college, got bored. He knew the war was going on, and so he enlisted. So in order to get into special forces, you had to volunteer and you had to enlist. And they had mental tests, physical tests, things like that, being able to swim without drowning, things like that.
Hmm.
And and we had characters, men that would not fit well in a conventional unit, which is, all the spit shine parades and things like this. But it'd be more of, okay, how can we fight the enemy and do the best job that we can? And men like that was what made Special Forces itself unique. And in SOG, we had men, senior NCOs, as well as a lot of young guys, because the casualty rate, we went through a lot of people. And I mean, during the Vietnam War, we've documented now 797 or 98 Green Berets that were either killed in action or missing in action from the Vietnam War. And that includes the 58 from the Secret War. And we could talk about there's at least 83 aviators, helicopter pilots, F-4 Phantom pilots that were killed in action supporting our teams on the ground in Laos or Cambodia or North Vietnam. So it was a grueling war, no question about it.
Where do you think that some of these men are now? Are they still is there any reports of any camps that are still there that, or do you think that most of them have passed away?
Well, sadly, we never really knew the truth. I mean, when the POWs came home in 1973, um, the Nixon administration said that those were the ones they never talked about the men that were in Cambodia or Laos or even in Vietnam who weren't turned over to POW camps. Those numbers, I will never get an accurate number on that. But that's why today the one number, the 1,572, that's an accurate number. And we've been working through the National League of POW MIA families that's based in Arlington, Virginia. And it's the first time that families of men fighting in a war went to the enemy and said, treat our POWs, our men better. because they knew about the torture and everything that was going on. And that unit stayed together all these years. And when the war ended, they continued to push our government and the communists for more information about the missing in an effort to find, identify, and repatriate those that were listed as missing in action.
Have you any information on that? Like, have they found anything? Is there any new light? I mean, we're talking years and years, and we're talking, 1,500 individuals. I mean, that's a big number.
It's a tremendous number. It's a heartbreaking number. And like in our case, the men that were missing in action in Vietnam, their families were told a little bit more about their soldiers. Our men, because they were in a secret war, they would get a notice that just basically said, your son died behind enemy lines fighting for his country. Nothing more. Nothing about the valor, because in the end, we had 12 people that were awarded the Medal of Honor alone that were just in in the secret war. And that's just an indicator of the intense combat that we had. And I doubt that we'll ever get it, because here's the other thing: 50 years later, the jungle itself, the jungle floor grows. So if the people from the Department of POW, MIA, accounting agency goes to a site, they have to dig through jungle
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I
just to get
bet.
to it. And the soil in the Southeast Asia is the most acidic in the world, where right now that soil is literally eating up the bones of the men who are missing in action. Only thing that'll be left will be the teeth. So I'm not optimistic after all these years. It's a heartbreaking issue, but also it's a dedication. And then getting back to our families from the secret war, their families never knew what happened. And so now, because we can talk about it, the books have come out, there are family members. We have the Special Operations Association, where in 1968, we had an anniversary. I mean, it was 2018 with the 50-year anniversary of one of our compounds got overrun. They killed 16 Green Berets in one night. And that meeting, we were able to talk about, the families came out from that night, and other families came out because they heard about the Special Operations Association, where they could learn and talk to men like myself and others who may have served with their relatives. And even to this day, now that I've been doing other podcasts, I get almost daily a note from somebody saying, "Did you know my grandfather or my uncle or my brother?" And because they never heard from 'em after the war. And it's just one of these heart-wrenching issues.
Returning from this war, the way that some of specifically uh, the soldiers that came from Vietnam, they weren't treated, they weren't really, they were treated, in my opinion, horribly.
No question.
Where do you think the disconnect was with our, with our country and the people? And I know that it was a war that a lot of people didn't like, didn't believe we should be there. I get it. I get it. I understand that. But I mean, where do you think the disconnect was with the people, that they were just not supportive of the soldiers who were coming back?
Well, a lot of that stems from the early days when the anti-war movements began. Now, it's been documented that there were communist infiltrators on the streets, on the campuses, that were lighting the fires to attack the war as opposed to supporting the troops that were there. And like any good communist, they know what they want to do. They want to divide the country any way they can. They were doing it then. They did it before the Vietnam War, and God knows they're still doing it today in different shapes and form as you look at our country as we get further divided on social issues even. So back then, yes, there were people who may not have been influenced by the communists, but they had that division there. And the hatred that came off of attacking the war, attacking the government, being anti-establishmentarian and all that, without really studying the facts. Like in my case, my South Vietnamese They knew their government was corrupt in South Vietnam, but they also knew they could live with that corrupt government. They would die for that corrupt government before they would live under the thumb of communism. And, the Americans that were dissenting the war didn't get a chance to interview Sal, Hep, Fook, the men that were on my team. And that's why we were dedicated to that mission as such, because they were willing to put their lives on line. I mean, in the jungle, my South Vietnamese were better than me, a lot better. And we always stood behind them and followed them through the jungle. I'm alive today thanks to the South Vietnamese on my team, to the South Vietnamese helicopter pilots that pulled our team out so many times, and of course, American aviators, whether it's from the 101st, the 1st Cav, the 176th muskets, all these different units that came to support us. And so, back to your point, I wish those convicts had had a chance to come and just live under the thumb of communism for a couple of days.
Sure.
And then you really look at this whole situation a little bit different.
Without a doubt.